Namaste. As part of introduction to Sri Aurobindo's writings, we take up today collected works of Sri Aurobindo, volume 10 and 11. A word about this writing, which is titled as Records of Yoga. This writing was found later on as part of Sri Aurobindo's notes, and its publication was neither approved by Sri Aurobindo nor by the mother. So it was found, and at some point it was decided to publish it for whatever reasons. But it's a fascinating document at one level, but like all fascinating documents, one should be very cautious in approaching it. The reason is that these diary notes were Sri Aurobindo's private notes meant for his own yoga journey. They are wonderful. They show us in detail how Sri Aurobindo followed the yoga with such meticulousness as of, much more than what the most modern scientist would ever follow. Because when it comes to psychological field and spiritual field, we are our own scientists. It's not like we are our own scientists and we are our own laboratory. It's not like the standard method that pick up 10 people. Well, 10 people you may find nothing, because spiritual evolution is yet not really begun. We have glimpses here and there. So because Sri Aurobindo was initiating the whole process, so he started observing meticulously every step of the journey, and he wrote it. But these notings were not meant for public consumption, only in the sense that people would not be able to make much sense out of it. For instance, Trikal Drishti is several times mentioned as T3. But that apart, what will we understand? He is speaking in Trikal Drishti of so many visions, images, and some people, when they read it, they feel this is the path we have to follow. What we have to follow has been given to us in a number of volumes, and secondly, after 1926, the whole thing changed. So let me put it in context. When Sri Aurobindo came here to Pondicherry, he speaks in one of the letters to Barin that the limbs of the yoga were revealed to him by the world master. And so there was a program of yoga given to him. Now, this program, there are some elements which are common to all of us who practice the yoga. But we must understand that the program of the pathfinder is very different from the program of the one who walks on the path. So let me illustrate that, you are in a jungle and you have to build a road. So obviously it's a Herculean effort. The jungle is full of all kinds of creatures. The jungle is, uninhabitable. You have to lay down the road, make it safe, foolproof, everything. Make sure that the roads do not break down like many of the municipality dug roads. All this you have to do. Wiring, light lamps, everything has to be done. What is our part of the effort? Once the path is made, to walk on the road. That is also an effort. So Sri Aurobindo was given this program because he is the pathfinder. And interestingly, if we look at these records, from 1909 to 1912, you will see some infrequent records. They are more like notes. He has observed something and he writes a note. And from 1912 to 1920, we see consistently there is a writing which goes on till 1920 October. And from 1920 October till 1926, there is no writing. Either there is no writing or they have been burnt away, because there are a number of things which Sri Aurobindo obviously did not want. So many things about the future he has foreseen, so many challenges. So he had, given it to fire. Now there is an interesting narration about it. A.B. Purani speaks about some of the notes which were discovered later, 1927. Again we see some writings in 1927. After that, from 1926 December, after the Siddhi day, till 1927 April, a few months, there are again records, after which the records were abandoned. Why? Because at one level the Siddhi was fulfilled. We know the Siddhi day, and then subsequently the mother took over. The yoga changed entirely. So in this entire yoga, you won't find reference to, open to the mother, give yourself to her. But after 1926, the first document that came is the mother. That the mother contains the kernel of all these things that Sri Aurobindo has tried. He made it so easy for man. So we must understand records of yoga. Okay, it may interest some people. Some academic people try to take interest in it. I am not sure how much they can make out of all this. And some people, just for the sake of, 1910, the program that was given, or 1913, what was it? Sapta Chatushta, things like that. But for the practice of yoga, records on yoga are not the book for practice. For practice, Sri Aurobindo has given the synthesis of yoga, and subsequently letters on yoga. There is the mother, and above all Savitri. With this proviso should be there, because very often one sees people picking up records of yoga, and because there is Sapta Chatushta given there, people begin to read it and begin the practice. Of course, there are many things there which sound very simple, but the essence is already there in the synthesis. And we'll see how. So this program which was given to Sri Aurobindo was given sometime, probably even before he came, but he has written it down in 1913. So we must also understand that there are many things which he has experienced which he has not written. Or probably they have been written, but he has not wanted it to be published. So one story I remember, that's a very personal account of it. Someone who has worked in the archives for a very long time, Rangada. So he was telling me that, there were some notes. Sri Aurobindo had foreseen all things about the future of the ashram, world, everything. So, but he didn't want anybody to read it. So for a long time it was lying in his room. Then Nalnida kept it. It was like a treasure, rarest treasure. And Nalnida later on handed it over to Jugalda. And he told him that don't read it, because that was the word which went down. So he was sharing an incident that Jugalda couldn't resist. So he just read one page of it. And that was enough to blow his mind away. So I asked Rangada, didn't you ask him? They were pretty close. He said, I asked him several times, tell me a little bit of that. And he said, even if you punch in my belly to the extent that I vomit, I will not tell you a word. So what he had foreseen, all about the world, but it's enough to show that when Sri Aurobindo writes, not like a mystic who is just, describing a path. Very systematically, methodically, he had gone through all these things, and with such perfection. For instance, he has the Trakal Drishti and he sees an event in the future. For instance, he sees that one Gupta is dead. And then he says, when the Lipi came, he was actually already dead. But it came as if it's in the future. Or somebody has to come. He sees a person who is going to come. And when the person comes, the physical features are slightly different from what he has seen. So to that extent, perfection, timings, he was meticulously a crow at this point of time, there he will come. So he comes, but the timing is a few minutes here and there. So one thing we see from the records is that consistent with the age, like a thorough-going spiritual scientist, he was documenting things. Not for posterity to read and analyze it, but for his own, because it's the need of the age. He himself, as he said, there was an agnostic inside him. And so he wanted the perfection, not to leave anything which is, subject to even the slightest error. And that's why when Dilip Kumar Roy later on, after all, great disciples, how are you so sure? Is there anything like yoga force? He says, had we not been experimenting it hundreds and thousands of times and objectively seeing its effects, we would not be in a position to tell you that yes, there is something like as yoga force. Then he asked that, but does it act in everyone? So he says that, there is a thing called as Agni Shakti, but it doesn't burn everything. So he gives very logical example. There are conditions to be fulfilled by those who are receiving it. So this way we see the records of yoga is a massive document, but primarily 1912 to 1920. And then with the coming of the mother, October 1920, it stops. Why? Because mother has already come in April. But November 1920, the mother shifted into the house, which today we call as, she shifted from the place where she was staying. So, not into ashram house, but I think it was Raghavan's house or the guest house, one of the houses. She shifted there. So, after that, the entire yoga has taken a new turn altogether. Some people are curious to find, did he write something on 30th March? Did he write something on 24th April? No. Certain things are too profound to be written. He has mentioned passingly about the coming of ours, and there he speaks about that he believes that desire has created this world, and we know in mother's own conversations that was his belief, that desire has made the world. And he would try to argue with Sri Aurobindo, and Sri Aurobindo would just say it's not desire but delight which has made this world. So there are notings like that, but always it's important to understand with entire Sri Aurobindo's writings that Sri Aurobindo is not confined to his writings. That's what he reminds us in Synthesis of Yoga, Shabd Brahmati Vartate. So, just because one doesn't find something doesn't mean that what he would have experienced, because in the diary it's not written. But when Barinda asked Sri Aurobindo, what did you experience when you saw mother for the first time? So he said, she is born free. One of the first things he told him, she is born free. She's not bound by anything. So this is the background. And then we see that this book is divided into 5 parts. And the first is the program that was given to Sri Aurobindo, Sapta Chatushtya. So basically it's the 7 elements, and each of them having 4 aspects. Now, some places there are 5 aspects, but in general scheme he has written as Sapta Chatushtya. And there are 2 orders in which it has been mentioned in the book. One is the order in which it is written, and the second we'll see as a revised order. But as I said, this is more for academic interest. The order that we have to follow is given in the synthesis. We'll read a little bit from here. Then we see the diary entries and the record of yoga, which runs right up to part 2 and part 3. And then there is part 4, which is again undated writings, which are largely connected with his own experiences. Now, how was he writing these records and subsequent writings? Sri Aurobindo described there were 4 ways in which he was receiving it. So, one was lipi. So, lipi is subtle writing in the etheric record. So, he would see some of these mantras, richas actually appearing in the subtle ether, like the rishis of old. So, they were the lipis. Then there was script. Script was something which was being transmitted, and he would write it. That was script. Then there are sortilege. Sortileges are books which he has, books or some other writing which has appeared or he has found it. But it has revealed itself in a completely new light. So those are the sortileges. For instance, at one place he writes about the Hiranyakashipu story and Prahlad avatar. He doesn't write as a story, but he passingly has an image and he understands what that Purana story really indicates. And the 4th is Vani, where he's actually hearing the voice of God. Then there are automatic writings. In automatic writings actually started from 1905 onwards, more as an amusement and just to see what possibilities there are, especially because Barin used to be engaging in those writings. And he would sit and just hold the pen, and then the writing would start. Automatic writings are different from script. Script is something which is coming from a high source. Not necessarily the highest, but from a high source. Automatic writings are writings where a disembodied spirit would come and start using the pen of the person. I'm not sure whether somebody has practiced it or not. I just remember trying it once in 11th standard and again in MBBS. It is a very fascinating phenomena, but Sri Aurobindo clearly later on said many times the subconscious of the person which can take hold, subliminal things which can take hold. So it's not always a disembodied spirit which comes. It is something which can come from various sources. For instance, even Sri Aurobindo's encounter with Swami Vivekananda in the Alipur jail. So it is presented as Swami Vivekananda came and he spoke what he had to said based on some statements of Sri Aurobindo. Now in evening talks, when it was asked to him, he said it was some mental portion of Swami Vivekananda which begins to change things a little bit. So with Sri Aurobindo, one has to see things in totality. So automatic writings had started there. Some of these were picked up as an evidence in the Alipur case, and they are very fascinating because very interesting people would come and beings would come and they would tell him about different, like for Gandhi, who is he, and for Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who is he, and many other aspects, they will come and reveal. One piece of automatic writing which turned out into a whole book is Yogic Sadhana. So this was where Raja Ram Mohan Roy used to constantly appear before him. And it seems it is he who was behind this writing and used the pen to write this book called Yogic Sadhana. It was published with Sri Aurobindo's permission. And for quite some time, it was even used by some of the early disciples. Later on, Sri Aurobindo said he had gone far beyond and it's no more. So some of these writings, Sri Aurobindo himself said, for instance, Yogic Sadhana, he himself said that it is now something of the past and it's not something he wants his disciples to follow. But still, it's a fascinating piece of writing. And then you have material from disciples' notebooks. There is also, very interestingly, a page where Sri Aurobindo writes about some of the disciples whose past lives he has seen. And two of them I remember which was very interesting, fascinating. One was Dilip Kumar Roy. So, three in fact. Dilip Kumar Roy, one wonders why Sri Aurobindo was so much close to him. There must be many reasons which are beyond human comprehension. But one of them was that he was Hector during the Trojan War. And in that war, Sri Aurobindo was Paris. So you can imagine, Hector had tried to shield Paris. In fact, gave his life. So when Dilip Kumar Roy came to know about it, he was not happy that Achilles had dragged him all around 7 times. Then for Durai Swami Iyer, Sri Aurobindo said King Janak as well as one of the King Janak. He has not specified there because Janak is a lineage. So King Janak as well as Chandragupta Maurya. Then for Pavitrada, that's very fascinating. Aspects of Christ and Ramakrishna. So these are some of those, about 10, 11 disciples he wrote. Later on, all this was stopped. At one point of time, Sri Aurobindo would speak about these beings entering into some of the disciples, even the descent of the gods. But then the mother found that people tend to romanticize. They start living in the past. That, I am so and so, I was so and so. And therefore, the focus gets changed because now we are going to move toward the future. It doesn't matter what one was. Then in this book, there are also some kind of future predictions, but not, please don't look at Nostradamus type of predictions. Sri Aurobindo has deliberately not done that. He was asked that, why don't you fix a date? He said, no, I don't want to fix a date. You don't know? He said, I know. Why? You don't want to fix? He said, the moment I fix it, speak about it, then it becomes an open secret. And all the hostile forces will start attacking it. So even in the records of yoga, one of the reasons why he was writing was to crystallize certain things. On the other hand, many things were held back. My own surmise is that some of the most important things which he had foreseen, he held it back. So that much for the entire book. As I said, it has more than the records. There are other aspects also, like automatic writing. But it's titled as Record of Yoga, primarily because of its, I think, major bulk is that. So now we'll read a few passages from Sapt Chatushtya. And we'll see that there are many there is, for instance, the first Chatushtya is Shanti Chatushtya. Sri Aurobindo in all his writings, he speaks about first thing to be established in the yogin is samatha. No yoga without samta. In Gita, essays on the Gita, he dedicates a large amount of number of pages on samatha practice. And in Synthesis of Yoga, if there is anything written, maximum it is samatha. And samatha means in two things. One is passive samatha, where all the contacts of the world, all the impacts of the world, one is able to take without breaking down. So one should have nerves of steel. So I Vivekananda put it like that. Because if we are not able to take the impacts of the world, how are we going to take the impact of the supramental Mahashakti? We can't even imagine. When Mother was asked about supramental Mahashakti descending into the Adhar, he said, "My child, like a little point, you are dancing around the ego." And can you even imagine if it enters into the system? What wideness and plasticity is required. So before that, a fundamental practice is samta. So passive samta is the ability to receive the impacts of the world. Dynamic samta is you have to act. Now the moment you act, there will be a choice. Receiving everything with an equal mind is fine, but when we act, we have to make a choice between this or that. So that aspect is called as dynamic samta or the active samta. So the very first entry with Shanti Chatushtyan, where he speaks about four aspects of Shanti, perfection of Shanti. Samata, Shantihi, Sukham, Hasyam, Iti, Shanti Chatushtayam. That's how he writes most of them. So it's not just about peace. Peace becomes a basis. Samata, there is also the Hasyam and there is the Sukham, the happiness that flows when the heart is at peace, and the laughter of the gods. Samatha, the basis of internal peace is samatha, the capacity of receiving with a calm and equal mind all the attacks and appearances of outward things, whether pleasant or unpleasant. So that's why I keep telling everybody, see, India is Yoga Bhumi. All other places are Bhog Bhumi. So, in India, you have no choice but to practice yoga. You will, and it's perfectly suited. You have all the ingredients, inner ingredients. I mean, it's a grace that we drink surrender, faith with a mother's milk. Nobody is there to teach us. Otherwise, you go to the Western sphere. I have had this experience. People want to understand what is faith and what is surrender. How do you tell about faith? We just grow into it. And then at the same time, inwardly such a rich civilization, then outwardly you have so many challenges as nowhere else. So unless we practice samta, and not only samta, we laugh, we are happy, we take all this. And in the ashram context, of course, you will get plenty of opportunity to practice samta. Once Nirodha asked Aurobindo with some kind of bit of complaint, this, that, probably he had a little running nose and, fever. So he said, well, in this a fundamental practice of yoga is equanimity. I have done my bit in the early days of sadhana, graduated MA. Now your turn, please. He said, you have to go through it. The capacity of receiving all the attacks and appearances of outward things, whether pleasant or unpleasant, ill fortune or good fortune. Don't expect that yoga is now, I'm enrolled into the book of the elite. So now, of course, they don't want us to be unhappy to start with. Let's be very clear. The divine wants us to be happy. Walk the sunlit path. At one place, Mother says, my child, don't have this impression that the divine wants you to be unhappy. Certainly not. Yet, unhappiness comes in the way the world is constituted. Divine does not want you to be unhappy, but there are so many little, doors which are open to the adversary who will attack us. Nothing, just a attack of normal flu. And with the COVID whole thing going around, you suddenly feel your death warrant has come. So even when you don't, so we have to practice these things. This is the fundamental practice of sadhana. So first practice, ill fortune or good fortune. And we know Aurobindo in early years when he writes to Mridalini Devi, what does he write? He says, very often in this world, good comes out of evil. He brings good out of evil. Pleasure and pain, We want only things which are very pleasant. And as an extension, we want people to be around who are very nice to us. Oh, sir, you are great. You are something wonderful. All the mystics say something else. Nindak niyare rakhiye. Even people who criticize you, they help us to grow into that. Unfortunately, they have taken this burden. Honor and ill repute. This is something which mystics have spoken about. Ill fortune and honor and ill repute, praise and blame, friendship and enmity, sinner and saint, or physically heat and cold, etc. There are two forms of samatha, passive and active. So then he speaks of what is the way to arrive at it. All this is there in synthesis. So people who have not read synthesis, they feel, we have got a practice. Exactly, verbatim. But, not exactly verbatim this way, but the practice he'll speak about. In fact, in synthesis, he takes it to another level deeper. Here we'll see that he speaks about 3 ways. In synthesis, he takes it still deeper. He says, these are still on the way to equality. This is not perfection of equality. So he speaks of Titiksha. Titiksha is the ability to bear all contacts without being overpowered. So there will be things which are painful, there will be things which are pleasant, they will come, touch us on the surface. Even 1912, Aurobindo says, an attack of dukkham. They will come, but you are not allowed to be overwhelmed and say, now, I'll sit in a sack of blues. You are not allowed that. Calmly and firmly to receive both and hold and bear them as one who is stronger, greater, vaster than any attack of the world, is the attitude of Titiksha. So it's done with the sense of strength in the vital. The Kshatriya has this capacity. And the philosophical type is Udasinta. It is indifference to Dvanda. This is how life is. There will be some things which are good, some things which are evil. They come your way. Ill fortune, good fortune. So it's the philosopher's approach. And then there is Nati, is the approach of the heart. Nati is submission to the will of God. So here he says, Nati is the submission of the soul to the will of God. Its acceptance of all touches as his touches, of all experience as his play with the soul of man. Now the problem here is many people say, straight away people want to jump to post-graduation while one is in kindergarten. How can we say everything is the will of God? He's not saying that everything is the direct expression of the will of God. He's saying to start with, learn to take it. Then when you graduate, you will understand how the will operates, how there is a wisdom behind everything, how the play takes place, how there is hostile forces, adverse forces, good forces, how they all ultimately serve the great grand plan of evolution. That's later on. But to start with, to learn to accept with this state of Nati. And he says something very beautiful. Nati may be with Titiksha, feeling the sorrow but accepting is at God's will. Or with Udasinta, rising superior to it and regarding joy and sorrow equally as God's working. Or with Ananda, receiving everything as the play of Krishna and therefore in itself delightful. And this is the state of the complete yogin. Just if somebody can practice samta in this way, is a yogin. That's why in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, he says, Samattu yogi uchyate. If you can practice samta, even Shri Krishna says in the Gita, if you practice samta, you are a yogin. Not that put a batch, that's the greatest disgrace from fall from samta. Henceforth, I am a yogin. But samatha is the sign. Even in the Gita, when Sri Aurobindo writes so beautifully, when Arjuna asks Sri Krishna, what is the sign by which I can know that the man is realized, he is in a state of sthit pragya? And Aurobindo writes, Sri Krishna does not give any outward sign. The sign is inner. It is the equanimity to all the contacts of the world. Not to rush, leap at appearances. So that is how then there is active samta. What is the active samta? It is this universal or some ananda in all experiences which constitutes active samatha, and it has 3 parts or stages. So here it is the rasa which is there behind everything. Whether you are engaging in battle, it's not like when I am sitting alone in meditation, I am practicing samatha. In everyday affair of the life, If we read the records, it's surprising that every aspect of human life, literally every aspect, has been touched by the yoga force to change it, which includes trivial things like food and elimination of food. Even that, how the yoga force works. In all these, this is the least detail, what is yoga force to do with your regular, let's say, a bowel movement. But even there, because there is nothing which is regarded as trivial, everything can become touched by the spirit. So this is about the rasa. Then there is the three aspects of Shanti. Shanti is, here he speaks about maybe either a vast passive calm or a vast joyous calm based on nati. Then there is Sukha. Sukham is the complete relief and release from Dukha, from Vishad, which comes by the fulfillment of Samatha and Shanti. The perfected yogin has never in himself any touch of sorrow, any tendency of depression, cloud or internal repining and weariness, but is always full of a sattvic light and ease. Hasya, it is again an active site, and this about a state of gladfulness and cheerfulness. Its perfection is God's stamp and seal on the siddhi of the samta. Hasyam. So the ability to laugh, and how would the mother put it? She would say the ability to laugh at life in all circumstances. This is the perfection. At one place she's asked, what do we do when adverse forces attack us? She says, laugh at the adversary. To Champaklalji says, Champaklal, smile in all conditions. Smile at happiness, smile at sorrow. In all conditions, learn to smile. At another place, he says to smile is to disarm the adversary completely. Try it. If somebody is trying to be very critical of you and trying to, of course, another thing, take if there is a truth behind it and learn the lesson. But if you know somebody is really trying to trouble you, then the best response is smile. After some time, he'll be so confused because what he wants is to trouble you. And if he doesn't see you troubled, just sees you smile. After some time, initially will try to raise the decibel of, but eventually leave you because his work is not fulfilled. He knows that, hamari dal nahi galegi. So when there is this perfection of samta, then what happens? It is in our internal being, the image of the smile of Sri Krishna playing Balvat as the eternal Balaka and Kumara in the garden of the world. So this becomes our second childhood and second adolescence. Balaka and Kumara. Sri Krishna is playing and smiling at the world. Then of course there is Shakti Chatushta, where you have Veer Bhav and Brahma Tejas, Gyan Prakash. So all this, as I said, it's a long subject, but I want to read one aspect here. Even he speaks about different kinds of Brahma Shakti, Kshatriya Shakti, Shudra Shakti. So I'll just read this. What is the Shudra Shakti? People often speak about Shudra and try to put it, Indian thought, casteism, and Shudra was regarded as relegated. What Shudra was initially, that's what we'll read here. Shudra Shakti. What are the Shudra Shakti? Kamaha, Premaha, Dasya Lipsa, Atma Samarpanam is Shudra Shakti. And then it describes, the Shudra is God descending entirely into the lower world and its nature. I suspect the word comes from Shudra, even in the smallest details of life. He becomes the God of lower, the least important thing, seemingly. But then what he writes, giving himself up entirely for the working out of God's Leela in matter and in the material world. So if you really look at the Shudra Shakti is created from the extreme descent of the divine in matter. Behind it is the Prema. That's why it is called as Prema Shakti. Because this is the ultimate of Prem, to descend completely into the darkness of material world. From this standpoint, he is the greatest of the four Shaktis. Because his nature goes direct towards complete Atma Samarpanam. That's where the Shudra stands. He is the path, the feet of the Lord. If we look at the Purush Sukta. But the Shudra bound has cut himself off from knowledge, power and skill and lost himself in the Tamoguna. He has to recover the Brahmana, Kshatriya and Vaishya in himself and give them up to the service of God, of man, of all beings. So that's how when the Shudra recovered these things, then he has the true Atma Samarpan. The principle of kamaha or desire in him must change from the seeking after physical well-being and self-indulgence to the joy of God manifest in matter. The principle of prema must find itself and fulfill itself in dasya lipsa and atma samarpan, in the surrender of himself to God and to God in man. People often ask, the Shudra is the master spirit of the Kali, as is the Vaishya of the Dwapara, the Kshatriya of the Treta, and the Brahmana of the Satya. So people often ask, they don't understand what it means to serve the divine. Frankly, the urge to serve the divine comes at the end when, one may serve but not with this aspiration to serve the divine. Now we must distinguish between the two. We may work apparently, in a center or ashram or any place, but the urge to serve the divine comes when the Shakti has entered right into the matter, into the very physical consciousness. Then it comes. And this there even in Savitri when Sri Aurobindo describes as the centers open one by one. Selfless service of God and of God in man. Then there is Deha Shakti. What is Deha Shakti? Mahatva Bodho, Balaslaga, Laguta, Dharana Samarthyam. You see, if we look at the human body, many times some people, they are very restless. They just can't sit quiet. So what is the remedy? Read Sri Aurobindo. Very simple. Read Sri Aurobindo, read Savitri. You will see that spontaneously the quietude begins to come. Then all these Prana Shakti, Chitta Shakti, Buddhi Shakti, Chandi Bhav. Chandi Bhav is the force of Kali manifest in the temperament. And finally he speaks about Shraddha as Shraddha is necessary in two things. Shaktyam Bhagavati Cha Iti Shraddha. Shraddha he describes as the ultimate perfection of Shakti. Shraddha itself indicates that you are fully conscious that the Divine Mother is with you. You can't have Shraddha without that. There is somewhere this awareness. So a person with Shraddha is free of all fear. Why? Because he knows that the ultimate Shakti is within. You see, faith implies that. Whether we take it as within us or, as the Divine Mother, it's implicit within that. So he says there must be faith in the love and wisdom of God, fulfilling himself through us, fulfilling the Yoga Siddhi, fulfilling our life work, working out all for our good even when it is apparently veiled in evil. People who are, too intellectual, this is the problem. Buddhijivi. They try to, no, this is good, this is not good. But a person with absolute faith knows that whatever is happening, whatever be the appearance, ultimately good will come out of it. And this is called in synthesis of yoga as Kalyana Shraddha. And Sri Aurobindo insists on it again and again. Kalyan Shraddha. Kalyan Shraddha is that whatever may happen, whatever may be the appearances. In Savitri puts it, whatever be the appearance we must bear. When nothing we can see but drift and bail, a mighty guidance leads us still through all. So this is Shraddha, fulfilling our life work, working out all for our good. And there must be faith in the power of the Shakti, manifested by him with a capital H, in this adhara to sustain, work out, and fulfill the divine knowledge, power and joy in the yoga and in the life. So often people ask this question, am I fit for yoga? Well, if you rely on your own efforts, nobody is fit for yoga. There'll be one odd person here or there, probably, I don't know. But Sri Aurobindo said nobody for integral yoga. That is his words. Even the strongest and the greatest are not fit for this yoga by their own effort. No way. But if you learn to depend on the mother, she can pick up a blade of grass. That's how I understand that story where, when in Ramayana, this fellow, Indra's younger brother, Jayant, he comes to peck Mata Sita's feet. He is also deluded. What is this God? What God are they? And there is a long story behind it, but that apart. The moment he pecks at the feet of Mata Sita, What does Ram do? Nothing. He picks up a kusha because he has come like a crow. So he picks up a kusha, a blade of grass, and he throws it at the crow. This blade of grass is deadlier than Brahmastra. He thinks just a blade of grass, he thinks so much of himself. It chases him through all the three worlds. And he goes here, there, everywhere. And finally, he goes, Maheshwari says, look, you are a fool. The person who with a blade of grass can make you go all around. Don't you think by coming and surrendering to him, you are going to find the answer? So he realizes his folly and comes back and surrenders. So this is the power of Shraddha, that it is not by our own efforts, but by the Divine Mother's power that the yoga can be done. So therefore, what we have to do is to open more and more to her. Repeatedly, Sri Aurobindo reminds us. And this is the logic. Because people often ask, this is just open to her, become receptive, call her name. Well, this is the logic behind it. The logic that Jayant did not understand, and the logic that intellectuals don't understand. How can it be so simple? No, it is the only way, not even simple. Try doing the other way. So when she speaks about the supramental force acting upon creation, she says, the first to respond will be those with a psychic feeling. And then she described different kinds. And the most difficult people will be those intellectual people who have worked upon themselves. But then he says, yes, if they develop the faith, then they go much ahead. Because, the faith has come, so it makes a very good material. Without Shraddha, there is no Shakti. Imperfect Shraddha means imperfect Shakti. Imperfection may be either in the force of the faith or in its illumination. It is sufficient at first to have full force of the faith, for we cannot from the beginning of the yoga have full illumination. So at least we must have faith. That's why Sri Aurobindo says even a blind faith is better than no faith. So blind faith is something which doesn't understand the workings of God, but is faith that one will go through. But then the illumination comes and one understands the entire sequence, the wisdom that is operating through whatever is happening in one's life. Then, however we err and stumble, our force of faith will sustain us. When we cannot see, we shall know that God withholds the light, imposing on us error as a step towards knowledge. Who can write like this? Sri Aurobindo himself is justifying all our follies. He says, God withholds his light, and hence we have error. Our errors are his steps upon the way. And that's what he writes in his aphorism. This ultimate Vedanta. He says that one may wonder, one may even blame oneself, curse oneself, but it's not true. He has withheld the light because he wants us to move through that door towards knowledge. He's not saying that therefore commit blunders in life because that's the royal road. He's not saying that. He says, but there are occasions, there are moments when he uses everything, imposing on us error as a step towards knowledge, just as he imposes on us defeat as a step towards victory. And then there is Siddhi Chatust. So he speaks about Siddhis. Now in Siddhis, much is spoken about Siddhis, and people normally, here he is using the word Siddhi not in the terms of the ultimate perfection, but these powers. So Sri Aurobindo is an amazing combination of Vedantin and Tantric of the highest order. The Vedantic illumination which reconciles earth and heaven and beyond is there in his writing. So the difference is Vedantin is looking at this entire range, panorama, with the eye that reconciles God everywhere. But the Shakt wants to understand every bit of process and see in there the working of God. So there is a very interesting story about Dilip Kumar Roy. He came to Sri Aurobindo and he wanted initiation, and Sri Aurobindo would keep quiet. At one point he just told him casually that there's too much of intellectual this thing in you. So, but he didn't say openly that he has initiated or not initiated. So Dilip Kumar Roy goes to one of the yogis because he says, I must take initiation now. And this yogi comes and tells him, okay, you sit quiet. He says, I don't know how to sit quiet. Don't worry, you sit quiet part, I'll do it. So he makes him sit. And suddenly this yogi tells him, Why you are fooling me? So he comes out and says, what am I fooling you? You are already initiated by the master of masters. And you are coming to me for initiation. So he said, what do you mean by that? He said, Are, Aurobindo, he is sitting on the mountain of every possible siddhi you can imagine. And you are coming to me for initiation. He said, but how do you know? He said, he's standing behind you. He told me so. So then he said, but he didn't tell me so. He said, then the yogi, for a moment he became quiet. Then he said, do you have a hernia? He said, yes. He said, that's why. You get it operated, because under the pressure of the yoga, this may burst. It's such a tremendous pressure. So after that, you go back. So he asked Aurobindo that, why didn't you tell me straight away? He said, because you like to go, all these excursions. He knows ultimately it belongs to him. He is bound to come. So that kind of Shakti Samarth, where sitting in one room, he was conducting the entire world war. This is, after Shri Krishna, the first example, or rather I would say, Shri Krishna and Aurobindo, and if you want to put it remotely, Agastya Rishi, to an extent. No other example in the world of this kind of Shakti Samarth. And of course, we know that both of them were connected with Aurobindo. So he says that there are people who renounce siddhis and powers because they feel that, they may take one away from the yoga because they are a big, they can be a big allurement to the ego. Now, Aurobindo says very interestingly, number one, these powers are not miraculous but powers of nature which manifest themselves as soon as the Vijnan Padma in us begins to open. And are no more a cause for bragging and vanity than the power of eating and breathing or anything else that is nature's. So he says, don't think that you have the Shakti. Shakti has you. These things are coming naturally, like a faculty of writing or a capacity for anything. Number two, that they can manifest fully only when we leave ego and offer up our petty separate being in the vastness of God's being. To say that, I am going to heal by some kind of miraculous healing, it will never become perfect. Three, that you see, that's the beauty. Olden time doctors, how they worked, they did not claim miracle healing and all that. But these doctors, what did they say? I will give you medicine, God will cure. Because they didn't have many medicines to give. And people got cured. Now, I am going to cure you. God, I don't know whether he exists or not. Maybe he does. Then he will quote you all the theories, get you into discussion. So that is the way to really act. Number three, when they manifest in the unpurified state, they are a dangerous ordeal to which God subjects us, and we can only pass through it safely by keeping our minds clear of vanity, pride, selfishness, and by remembering continually that they are His gifts and not our requirements. And number four, that these powers are not to be pursued for their own sake, but developed or allowed to develop as part of the flower of divine perfection, which is by God's grace blossoming out in us. So they come to a person on this path. They are necessary. When you meet with the world, how are you going to meet with the world with knowledge but no power? That's what in the end, Death tells Savitri. That knowledge is with you. That now I know. But do you have the power? Because till now he is taking her on the ground of Vedanta. Says, do you have the power? And if so, reveal itself to me so that I can worship you. So, in this perfection, he says there are four aspects of Vijnan Chatushtya: Jnanam, Trikaldrishti, Ashtasiddhi, Samadhi in Vijnan Chatushtya. So we know that, Ashtasiddhis are those Lagima, Anima, Garima, Mahima, Vyapti, etc., which, are traditionally regarded as the Ashtasiddhis. And Jnanam itself, he speaks about Drishti, Shruti is inspiration, Smriti, intuition, and Vivek. So, what is knowledge? It comes through Drishti, revelation. It's the inner revelation. Then there is Shruti, inspiration. And there is Smriti, consisting of intuition and Vivek. So, it, the whole thing goes so beautifully. Satya Dharma, Trikal Drishti. Trikal Drishti can work in this way, he says. One is that directly the whole thing can come. Or sometimes you need a point of contact. Sometimes the mother and Aurobindo would pick up a photograph. And then sometimes there also again there are two ways. One is the moment you look at a photograph, you come to know. And the second you concentrate and you enter into the consciousness of the person. And you know all about the past and present. Astasiddhi, Prakamya, Vyapti, Aishwarya, effectiveness of the will acting on object or event without the aid of physical means. In fact, ultimately in this yoga, there are only two things which are important: faith and will. Whatever is the object on which our will and faith are stuck, persistingly, that ultimately ends up manifesting in our life. Even if there are 1,000 difficulties, doesn't matter. By pressure or tapas of the Chaitanya straight on the object that has to be affected. Then he speaks about Ishita, Vashita, the condition of power, conditions of jnana, samadhi. Then there is finally the Sharir Chatushtya. So he doesn't want us to remain unhealthy in body which is sickly and tired, but very high in the mind, conceiving things, giving lectures on Vedanta with a pot belly. He doesn't want us to do that. He wants us to remain in perfect health, because ultimately all manifestation is through the body. Shariramapi khalu dharma sadhanam. It is the basis for the fulfillment of dharma. And here dharma is not just doing some ritualistic acts. Everything, all the various governments of life, Sri Aurobindo describes dharma. Dharma includes in its widest sense all the various offices and governance of life. So you have a Yug Dharma, you have a Pati Dharma, Patni Dharma, Shatra Dharma, as a Sikshaki of Dharma, as in the war field you have a Dharma, in front of the Guru you have a Dharma. Everything there is a Dharma. Dharma is the way to do things in a way that they lead toward the upward evolution and not toward the downward gravitation. So if there is a situation of conflict, if you try to strive towards unity and harmony, it is dharma. Sometimes, yes, if there is a conflict where a large section of mankind is going to be affected, then yes, you have to remove. So these are the Sharir Chatushtya. What are the four Sharir Chatushtya? Arogya. Arogya we all know, absence of, any kind of roga. Utthapana, the ability to, rise up. Sri Aurobindo used to experience this. Not only in Alipur jail, subsequently also. The defying of gravitational pull upon the body. The body can become so light. Saundaryam. Sri Aurobindo's body, we know how A.B. Purani, when he saw him, he was completely surprised. He had, otherwise Sri Aurobindo had darkest complexion with those chicken pox marks. You can see his earlier photographs. And then when he saw him, he said, and his hairs all as if, they are all silky with nice, as if oil has been put. There was no oil, but all internal. And he asked, sir, what has happened to you? So he avoided the question and asked Purani, and what has happened to you? But Purani describes even the complexion and the hue of his body had changed. And with the mother, till she is, almost entering 80s, he says that till the sadhana was in the vital and the physical, aging was stopped. You see her photographs, you'll see it. But the moment it descended into the subconscious, where she started tackling with all the things of, the sadhaks and the world problems, that is when the effects of aging come up. And the four is Vivid Ananda Iti Sharira Chatushthyam. So there is also all the kinds of Ananda, and part of this is Karma Chatushthyam, which is Krishna, Kali, Kama, Karma. Brahma Chatushthyam, Yoga Chatushthyam. So obviously this is something which is to be read in detail if somebody is interested. But as I said, it is not for our practice that he wrote it, it is for his practice that he wrote it, please. Our practice is extremely simple. Sri Aurobindo all the time was trying to make it easier and easier for man. That was his purpose. Just imagine giving this practice to anybody, and people will be completely lost. Even to practice one element, equanimity, is itself a lifetime. I mean, yogis have declared samatya yoga uchyate, that too passive equanimity. Not even the dynamic equanimity is something which you don't find anywhere mentioned as such. So people have this question, if I practice equanimity, I'll become indifferent. They don't even know the difference between indifference and equanimity. How will I act in the world? So all this he has raised to what level of perfection. So we'll now just close. close with one of the things which is there from the record. So record is, as I said, it is meant for Aurobindo. But still, since we are talking about records of yoga, we'll do it in two parts today. So the first record entry is 17th to 25 June 1909. It's on 17th June, Thursday. And something very interesting here. Started Amavasya for Barisal, but in bracket he writes Amavasya. And then he says, the Amavasya is Kali's day, so favorable to me. The very first record starts with Kali. And then he also writes, in train to Khulna, small sun in center of brilliant Swarupa. 28th March 1914, the day before the mother has come here, he writes, in Antaradarshi, the golden Kali, four-armed and weaponed, destroying the Asuras. A young man rushes at and throws his arms around her in filial love. He is spared and lifted up and carried away in her arms, no longer as a young man but as a boy. Symbolic of the process of conversion from the Asuro-Rakshasic mind to the divine Balbhava by the embrace of Kali. The visitation of Kali seems to be intended to save him from his Asura environment, now turned hostile to him as to Prahlad. And then he says, was it in this way that the legends of the Puranas were formed? So it is like the environment has turned hostile and there is the intervention. Then December 1926, it continues. He speaks about the fullness of the supramental energy now. 3rd January 27, he speaks about the supreme force descends, the difficulty is finished. So is yoga yet completed? That's how 1926 is called the Siddhi Day. And October 31st, 1927, which is the last entry. Today, Anishwara is actually inconscient. Ish, Anish. He has lost all his Godhead. He has lost all his powers and he has become Anish. The same Ish who becomes Anish. The Anishwara has acquired the supramental and Gnostic character. Not that all movements have entirely eliminated the mental element, but all are supramental or supramentalized, or else even Gnostic over mind, infallible, is beginning more freely to emerge. Ishvara consciousness is growing both below and above, and Ishvara is beginning. The supermind is increasing in the supramentalized movements and gnosis in the supramental movements. And people say, oh, Aurobindo spoke about supermind. Did he actually experience it? That's why Mother had to correct that what happened on 29th February 1956 is supramental manifestation. And then she said, descent is an individual phenomena. Aurobindo was experiencing it several times. That's how he could speak about it. Ananda is taking possession and becomes automatic, needing only memory or a little attention to act at once. All vision, transmutation of senses, all vision, hearing, smell, taste, touch is now Anandamaya. Even all that is seen, heard, sensed is beginning to be felt as full of Ananda and even as if made of Ananda. So, all that was regarded in traditional yoga as a snare, senses have changed into their original work is for the flow of Ananda, manifold Ananda. Sahatuka Ananda of all except event is now automatic. Ahatuka Ananda within the body shows signs of reaching the same state but has not quite reached it. Even the body was being supramentalized, not just that some inner consciousness, mind. This is the only physical siddhi that promises to be soon initially complete, for arogya is still hampered by obstinate, minute fragments of illness. Then, after he had completed all this siddhi, right supramental action in the physical, then Sri Aurobindo started calling some people around him. Before that, people were coming and going, but there was no formal like ashram. And the mother was in the forefront. It is then that he started that, okay, people can come, because he knew that after that siddhi is complete, he can give that to others. And then the mother had come and joined, and he gave the entire work to her, and himself withdrew into a still deeper deep. And one would ask, sir, what are you going to do now? He would say, I am going to renounce all this. What? Yes, I know now it is possible. So, what will you do now? Now I am going to make it come down and manifest in the entire creation and for all who are ready and called for it. Namaste.